My name is Manny Osaba. I'm from Jupiter, Florida, and I'm finishing up my master's with the sports management program this summer. I've been an FSU diehard my entire life. That's why I'm honored and excited to tell you about a campaign we have involving FSU Sports Analytics. I'm leading this initiative through the FSU Coaches Clubs to raise funds for several of our women's sports programs that were affected by COVID-19 budget cuts. That's why we need your support to keep sports science technology like Whoop bands, vert, and catapult vests on the field and in use. Investing in sports analytics is one of the best investments at this university. Whether we're maximizing the work rate of our players or resting them at key moments, it's all about working smarter, not harder. I hope you can join us in making FSU a leader in sports science. Support this campaign at fsucoachesclubs.com. And as always, go Noles.
Hey Adam, thanks for joining us today. Hope you're doing well.
Doing well, thank you. Yes, good to be here.
We've got just a couple of questions for you today. We'd love to get a little bit of kind of background information on how you got to where you are, what your role is like day to day, and what you feel like the future of your job and kind of the general industry of sports analytics is going to be like. So in terms of your education, for kind of just people who don't know, would you give us a little bit of background on where you started out and kind of your education path to where you are now?
Yeah, so I initially got my bachelor's in criminal justice. My idea was to go be a big time lawyer and, just make a lot of money and killing people with the law. But once I graduated with my bachelor's, I started applying for law school. I took the LSAT, I did all that stuff. And then when you apply to law schools, you have to write a personal statement. So as I was writing that personal statement, I realized that I was going into law for all the wrong reasons, the lights, the glamour, the pay, the status, and all that stuff. And so I pulled my applications. I stopped that path and I just went to go to work. I got into the sales force. I was a former college athlete, so athletes gravitate towards sales because it's a performance-based position. You're used to that your entire life, and you can make really good money. So from there, I got burned out of sales. I was tired of the culture, the morality issue of taking everyone's dollar, and it doesn't matter if what you're selling them helps them. You just take their money. So I went back to school and got my master's, my M.B.A. In marketing. And there, I found that I was really interested in how businesses position themselves in front of consumers, and how that works and the research that goes into it in order to position yourself properly to help people, with whatever product you have. So from there, I got a job as a market analyst in printers and consumer electronics. I did that job for about 18 months, and then the position opened up at SNL, which is now S&P Global, as a sports business analyst. The way I got my foot in the door in that position was I had a friend who worked in the HR department, and so she was able to get my resume to the top and get it viewed by the right people. And my position with my former company, Gap Intelligence, as a consumer electronics analyst, just put me in position to take on that role. So
that's awesome. And well, you really mentioned you had a degree in criminal justice and your master's, blanking right now on what M.B.A. stands for. Excuse me, your master's of business administration. So you don't have a degree in analytics. You didn't go to school to be an analyst. Do you think you need a degree? Would that have helped you? Or how has not having one kind of given you a different perspective than other people that you work with?
So a lot of the people that I work with are my age or older. So this new class of people where the baseline requirement is like Python and all that stuff. Like I think that's the new standard moving forward. But for people that were able to get in before this whole craze, our experience speaks for itself. So I think I missed the boat on that, thankfully, because I think that would have been a couple more years of school and a lot more just banging my head against the wall education wise. as I'm sure you guys know. But yeah, I think I just missed the boat on that.
Absolutely. So, kind of on that same note, what do you feel like the degrees that you do have, the schooling that you have completed, as well as your professional experience, what were you not necessarily prepared for going into your role with S&P, and how have you been able to learn on the job?
Yeah. So as I was looking at this question, just in preparation, it's, at the end of the day, it all goes back to politics, right? It's knowing the right people, being in the position to do the things that you need to do in your role. So I think my educational experience and my past work experience in a put me in a good place in order to do my job. Honestly, when I was 3 months into my job, I was the expert on sports already. There was nobody within my organization that could tell me more. My boss could tell me more about the media industry, but I was already the expert in sports. And so I think just being personable and reaching out to people at conferences, getting them to trust you and kind of bring you under their wing. Um, that's not something that they teach in college. I think that's something you can develop if you get after it and you just reach out to the right people. You treat people well with respect and things like that. So I think that would be the biggest insight from me, would just be treating people well and honestly, like, not a knock on your guys' generation, but there are a lot of new grads that come out of school and they have high GPAs. They've never been told no before. And they get into this organization that's been run by older people who've been doing it for a long time. And they want to say, hey, this is wrong. We need to change it. Hey, this is wrong. We need to change it. And so they come in with this chip on their shoulder, but it rubs the wrong people the wrong way. And so they kind of get hushed into the corner. And so I would just say, you have your degree, you know what you're talking about, but there's a right time and a wrong time to speak. And there's a right person to talk to and the wrong person to talk to. So just be wise about who you're talking to and speaking up in these meetings. That's what
Abs-
I would say, based on experience too, from my company.
Absolutely. And you did kind of touch on this a little bit already in your introduction, but kind of your very first degree would lead people to think that you want to pursue a career in criminal justice, like you said. And you did talk about kind of how that has changed. Where along the line did you see the switch to wanting to work into sport? Was that something that you had ever seen that you'd wanted to do in the past? Did you ever expect that you would kind of be where you are today?
Yeah, well, the goal was always to end up in sports, right? Growing up playing sports, I played college football at UNLV. Um, Going into law, like, that path was to eventually be a sports agent and take 10% of what I was hopefully going to make as a professional athlete. So that was always the goal, was to end up in sports. It's such a dynamic and exciting and high profile career path. And so that was always the goal. Just how I got there and what role I'd be in. This isn't the role that I had envisioned for myself, but it's just as competitive. It's just as high profile. It actually pays the bills for these athletes because it's the TV revenue. And so it's exciting, and for me, when I got my MBA, it taught me that business is a competition, and the better research you have, you can position yourself to help a lot of people or take advantage of the interest in sports. So
Absolutely. Awesome, that's great. Now that we have kind of more of a background on you, I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into what you do day to day, what a typical day looks like for you, and if you wouldn't mind for us breaking down that actual job role of sports business analyst. What does that actually mean?
yeah, yeah, my wife still doesn't know what I do. Okay, so first thing I do every day is I'm on Twitter. I'm on all the news articles, figuring out what bomb was dropped in the media industry, right? Who blocked out whose customers from their content? What did ESPN? How big a check did they sign this time? Just whatever big news happened in sports media, I need to figure out how that affects my coverage and what I need to do with that information. Do I put it in a database? Do I save it for later? Do I need to write up a hot article right now and get it out? So every day is different. You know, you plan, you try to position yourself that day to check all your boxes off, but you know, news hits, and then you have clients calling about that news. They want to know the financial impact of X, Y, and Z. And so, as we were talking about earlier, when it rains, it pours, right? And a lot of these media companies, they like to announce things on Friday nights. And so good luck with your weekend, right? So yeah, it's crazy. It's and clients want to know the answer yesterday. So keeping your Excel files up to date, keeping everything fresh and accurate is always a challenge, but you know, someone's got to do it. And in my last analyst role, the boss said, you know, they pay you to do the grunt work, you know, the fun stuff, the interviews, the, you know, the reporter insights and all that stuff. That's fun, but doing the grunt work in the data, that's where you make your money. So, you know, I take pride in that. The other question was, what do I actually do? So everything I do starts with our financial data. That's our bread and butter. That's why clients sign up for our insights, is because we have data that goes back to 1989 for sports networks. And so putting today's events in the context of the history of sports media, hey, this happened 10 years ago just with, you know, telecoms versus now we have OTT services, right? There's a new show in town. People were excited about it, and then it kind of fizzled out and became just another part of the cable network. So it's just putting today's events in context for our clients, for our readers, and people that might. I mean, we have investment banks that call me, and they're brand like, "Hey, we got to get into sports networks. There's a lot of money to be had here. Give me the one-on-one on what's going on in this business and how I can take advantage of it." So that's what I do. I educate people on this space. I tell them where I think it's going. But really, the best information I got as an analyst was, these are your kids. The companies that you cover, the people that you report on, they become your kids. You have to know them like your kids, right? So if an event happens in sports media, you have to put your Comcast hat on and say, okay, what does this do for me? How do I feel about this? What actions am I going to take based on this event, right? And you have to know these companies like you know your kids. You have to take on information and say, like for my son, if I see chocolate on the table, I know he's going to run for it. Whatever he has in his hand is going down and he's diving in, right? My daughter, she's going to see it. She's going to look around. She's going to be like, Dad, whose is this? Right? So understanding the different companies and how they approach different events and what their strategy is behind why they're doing what they're doing, you have to know these companies that way. And it's not like you can read a bunch of articles and study data sets. It takes time. And so it took pressure off of me as an analyst, as a new analyst, when my boss was like, hey, take your time. In order to see the world the way they see the world and then put a different hat on for another company, you just have to kind of marinate in it for a little bit. And then that day will come where it just clicks. You're like, oh, ESPN will see the same event one way, but NBC will see the same event a different way. So, you know, it's just kind of becoming an analyst. I don't know, that's kind of spacey, right? But it just takes time. And it's, once you have it, it's there.
Absolutely. And do you still feel like, even today, I know you've been in the role for a long time now, do you still feel like you're knowing your customers, learning your customers, and kind of figuring out what information they want and how they might necessarily react to certain pieces of information?
I mean, that's what's so exciting about this time, right? Because it's like they've gotten so comfortable with the way the cable networks model was working, where everybody pays for expensive sports rights. But then when OTT services came into town, and they're like, we're going to give customers the option to pay for this stuff or not. And so now they're scrambling. So every company is kind of readjusting their strategies to try to stay in front of the right people while still making the same money that they've been making. So every day it's something new, right? Fox months ago, prior to COVID, said, no, we don't want to get into the OTT space. We want the operators to do their job, and we're just going to be the kings of content and put out the best content possible. COVID hit. Months later, they purchased a company that does direct to consumer, and now they're like, nope, this gives us a better opportunity to stay in front of people. So every day, something new is happening, and these companies are taking that information in, reevaluating their strategy, and now repositioning themselves again. And this is happening every day because the landscape is changing, the margins are shrinking, the customer base is scattering, so they have to position themselves to be in front of the right people.
Absolutely. And for those who don't know, would you mind going in and describing a little bit more of what OTT actually means?
Yeah, it's over the top service, right? So you don't need a cable subscription in order to access this content. So Hulu would be an over the top service, Netflix, Amazon, all those things where you can pay, a subscription service and get your batch of content outside of the direct TVs or the AT&T now, whatever they call themselves today. It seems like they change it every 3 days, but
Yeah.
the big bundle services that have been popular for the last several years, that model is changing now.
Absolutely. That's great. Well, if you wouldn't mind as well, I'd love to get a little bit more information on kind of the data that you analyze, the insights on that data that you provide, and generally what type of people use that data.
Yeah. So
or analysis.
my biggest achievement, I would say, in this role in the last 8 years was I built out a sports rights matrix. And so before we had TV networks, economics data where we talked about the subscribers, we broke down the subscribers, whether they're in market, which pay a higher fee, or out of market, which pay a lower fee. We estimated their license fee, like how much they charge each subscriber. We estimated advertising revenue all the way down to the costs, right? The programming costs, the SG&A costs, and then we came up with a cash flow number. That was our service for the last several years before I got into this role. What they were doing was they were adding or subtracting percentages based on where the industry was going. And I was like, there's so much information out there on sports rights. We can actually use that information to get more accurate data points. So I built out this sports rights database that actually pinpointed, okay, well, the Marlins are making this much this year. The Rays are making this much this year. And then, so I took that data and input it into those models. So there's actual like data points in the programming expense line versus estimates that could, go up, down, whatever. So it's more of a fact-based metric. And so building out that database did two things. One, we had a database that we could use on its own, right? Because the Marlins just had a new TV deal come up that they signed recently. And so we could sell that data to the Marlins. We could sell that data to the network and say, hey, here's where the Marlins should end up based on, all the other Major League Baseball deals currently. And then what it also did was it elevated the value and the accuracy of our network economics models, which we had been offering to clients for years. So doing one thing elevated, our service in two different kind of buckets. And so clients, one, that opened us up to new clients now, major league teams. We do soccer, we do M.B.A, Major League Baseball. And there's one more I'm blanking on it right now. But they're able to come to us and say, hey, can we get that data set? We need to know where we need to position ourselves for our next round of negotiations. And then the traditional clients that we've had in the past, they're like, wow, this is wonderful. I've had clients call me and say, hey, I have this sports rights database up on my screen throughout the year, just going back to it and kind of benchmarking my estimates and things like that. So that's how clients are using our data. And the more feedback I get from clients, I love client feedback. Some people hate it. They don't want to hear it. I love it. I want to know how they're using our data. I want to know how, what they're thinking about when they're using our data. That way I can build out the next thing that will answer more of their questions, right? So my job is to question our clients, my job is to question our clients' assumptions, right? Because if I'm just saying the same thing that they're already thinking, they don't want to pay me a lot of money to do that, right? So I need to be in line with what the industry is doing. I need to be in line, but knowing my company, like how it sits in the media segment and how it sits in the media environment, people look to our data for insights, and so I can't just be on the same wavelength of them. I have to think 3 steps ahead. So one practice that I started doing is if I'm showing clients data for ABC, I need to have background data for D, E, and F, right? So I need to have more data than I'm showing my clients, because if they come back to me and say, hey, what about this, this, and that? I need to say, oh yeah, we thought about that. We have it here, but if you want that information, it's more. That's premium content that you need to pay more for. So it's really anticipate, right? And so using that same skill set as an analyst, where you put on the companies that you cover, putting on their hat and saying, okay, what does this event do for me? How do I feel about it? You do that same practice with your clients, right? So when I write an article, I write it and then I read it back the next day. And then I sit back and I think, okay, what would the CFO think about this? What questions are gonna be drawn out based on this, what I just presented to him? And then I put account manager hat on. And then I just put those different hats on and try to come up with a all-encompassing article that is going to touch on different things. But obviously you can't write about all of it, but you touch on it. That way they can come back to you and ask more questions. And another big pet peeve that I have is, have you ever read an article where the headline was catchy? The first 2 lines were like, okay. And then you get to the end of it and you're like, I want my 4 minutes back, dude. Like, you just robbed me of my life.
Absolutely.
So I always want to leave my clients feeling satisfied and like more knowledgeable about something. So if I can't do that, if I do all the research, write the article, and at the end of it, I know nothing more than I already know, I scrap it. I'm not going to post that article, because as soon as I read an article from an author that robs me of my 3 minutes, I stop following them. I'm like, no, you blew it. Like, I could have been reading something else. So I want to push the ball forward with every research article or white paper or whatever I put out. That way people see the value in it from day to day.
Absolutely, that's very powerful. It's kind of a little bit more on that data side as well. Can you speak to the kind of where you get your data? I know you're not someone who goes out and necessarily scrapes web pages all day long, but when you're writing up an article, doing an analysis, and you feel like there's a missing piece, where do you go to look for that? And how are you able to kind of know what you don't know, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So for me, I primarily cover regional sports networks, and we cover 50 RSNs across the United States. And so the best resource that I've found for those is the local paper, right? Being that it's sports and people are super passionate about their sports, they want to know everything about it. They're experts, right? You can go to any city in any state and someone's going to know about that TV deal, when it expires, how much it's worth, who got paid based on that deal. They're going to know the details of it. And so I go to the experts in that local market. I look at the news. I mean, I have so many subscriptions to these local newspapers. It's ridiculous. But they're the ones that are, they're the professionals in that. And so I go to them first. From there, they have a lot of questions, right? And they're going to give you they're going to whittle down that scope as to where that number or that data point could be. And then I back it up with my internal data, the estimates that I have. And then being my company's been around for a long time, we have a list of clients that have a really good relationship with us. So I can go back to them and say, hey, here's kind of where the ballpark figure that I'm thinking or that I'm seeing or that I'm kind of landing at. What do you think about this number? So you kind of triangulate that metric based on all those different resources. And then usually if you write a high profile article, you're going to make somebody mad. So they're going to call after you post the article. Someone's going to call or email and say, hey, we need to talk about this number. And then from there, you can kind of, I don't know. I had a network, a high profile net, one of the best networks in the country. And their PR guy basically yelled at me for 15 minutes. But I didn't change my number because the facts and the numbers that he was throwing at me, just I had been through those and they were wrong. So he just didn't like the number and the light that it put on his company. So he was doing his job, but I had to do mine too. So that's the other part of it, right? When you put an estimate out there, you've done the research, you've done the work behind it to get to that number, hopefully. And so when you get a little bit of heat for it, you can stand your ground. So, yeah.
Especially if you have the data to back it up. Absolutely,
right.
yes.
Exactly. Okay.
That was great. Thank you. So again, this is kind of on the day-to-day kind of topic. Who do you collaborate internally at your company with? Do you have a team that you work with day-to-day, or are you kind of in your own silo, your own area of the company?
Yeah. So with the media landscape changing so frequently these days, I work a lot with our multi-channel analysts, the guys that estimate the subscriber numbers for each operator. I'll work with our advertising team, just try to figure out where the forecasts are going based on where I see the regional sports network market going. But for the most part, I'm a one-man team. I have some junior analysts that help me with some data finds and things like that. But at the end of the day, if my name is on that paper, I want to sift through. So, you went back to, you're not scraping sites. Basically, I am. We do have some software that'll do that. But if I'm going to put my name to that number, I want to make sure that it's the best number possible. So, and that's another thing as an analyst. If you make it big and you have a team of analysts doing your grunt work for you, make sure you're the last one that sees that number and signs off on it, because you're the neck that gets wrung if it's wrong. So, the best person to ask about a dinner, how it turned out and all the things, is the chef, the guy that actually put it in the pot, cooked it at the right degree, temperature, and all that stuff. So as an analyst, when you get questioned on your numbers, you got to be able to say where they came from and how they got there and why it's going that direction versus this direction. And, that goes, one of your forward-looking question bullet points is, where's your role as an analyst in the future? It's that human touch, right? The more we go AI and machine learning and all that stuff, the best feedback and the best, from the best feedback I get from clients is, hey, thank you for hopping on this phone call with me and walking me through your data set. A software program won't be able to do that. And so the more I have interactions with my clients, the more they value and appreciate our service. I'm able to hop on a phone call and say, hey, that number got there based on A, B, C, and D, and it's going this direction because X, Y, and Z. And then they can challenge those assumptions with a person in real time versus having to spit it into a formula or a software and spit out another number and not being able to walk through how that assumption gets to that endpoint. So I think there's always going to be a need for an analyst and a human kind of interaction, because if it's just numbers on a wall or numbers on a website, you kind of lose credibility if you can't walk yourself through it. And so, sorry, I kind of jumped a couple of questions, but that all goes back to the point of be involved with your data set, be involved with it. Don't just take someone else's research and make it your own. You have to get dirty into the data, and go through that thought process, because those questions do come up. The higher profile client you have on the call, he wants to know the underworkings. He wants to understand how you got to that figure versus, okay, I pay you a lot of money, so I'm just going to take that number.
I do actually want to dive a little bit deeper into that too. And you made a great point that kind of the human element of your job is very important. And I'm a little bit partial. I'm in data science. I'm here all the time about AGI and computers taking over the world. And I can definitely see where machine learning models can kind of fit in and kind of work the way we do things, but I'm a huge proponent of having human eyes on a subject and human conversation back and forth to kind of communicate the underlying themes and messages of whatever data or analysis you're presenting. If you could touch on that a little bit more, what parts of your job have you seen that really do require that human element, and where do you kind of, or do you at all, think a computer might not be able to do a certain task that is required for your job?
So I'm probably not the right analyst to touch on this subject. My company a couple of years ago did a machine learning kind of AI experiment in a different division. I think it was the multi-channel team, where they had the same assumptions. They kind of fed the machine its inputs and all that, and then they tested their projections. We do 7-year projections. They tested their own projections versus the AIs, and I never heard from it again. So apparently it blew up in their face and they stopped doing it. I don't know. But it never trickled down to my division. I kind of wish it would have. That way I had a little more insight into what the future may hold. But they did try the test there and stopped hearing about it. So I have no idea. But I do think there will always be a human element to it, right? You have people who are making big money decisions and they don't want to just subscribe to a software that's going to spit out, hey, this is the magic number where you need to land or whatever. But I do see there are certain tasks early on in the research process that that could be taken over by a machine, and it, you know, just take man hours out of it. So I see the value in it. I think the more that I can spend my time on actual analysis and less time on scraping and just digging through, the better. Um, as long as I can peel back, open up the hood and see the numbers behind it, which I'm sure that's a thing. But the more time I can spend on analysis and strategy and all that stuff, the better for me. So I'm all for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Heading back to kind of your day-to-day role before we go into the future of the industry just a little bit more, I'd love to know and kind of get an idea of how you are personally measured in the organization, and kind of how you understand whether or not your customer is happy. Obviously, if they leave the company, that's a pretty good indicator. But generally, day to day, when you are reporting to people higher up in your company, how is success measured for you, and how do you know when your customer is liking the results you're producing?
Yeah. So we have an internal article reader. It tells us how many clicks we're getting on it, just like any other, reporting site. But there's also a metric in there that shows engagement. So not just how many people are opening and reading your articles, but there's like a bonus if they open up the Excel file attached to it, or how many more times they access that Excel file. So for me, it's I I kind of forget about that. I don't really worry about the metrics. Going back to whether I release an article or not, if it's adding value, I put it out there, um, and then just let the metrics do what they do. I think for me to become like a Yahoo contributor type, like to put that role and to put that burden on myself, would just be draining, right? Knowing my company and my role and where we are positioned in the sports media landscape, my job isn't to be the first to break news. Mine is to add value to it, right? What is the financial impact of this event? So I'll never beat ESPN.com or Yahoo or all these other media outlets to being first. But 2 or 3 days later, I'm gonna add the financial backing behind it, and so that's my role. So internally, I'm measured by clicks and things, but for me, I focus on, does this article, does this research report add value to the conversation? And then everything else, will kind of follow behind that. And then for me, how do I know if clients are engaged and things like that is I'll put out a big article and I'll get feedback, whether positive or negative, that one tells me that they're reading it, and two, that tells me that they're really digesting it and have questions about it. So I love that question, the feedback. And then it allows me to either adjust my next article based on that topic, or maybe peel back a little bit on some of the forecasts or the estimates. Um, but that's my biggest thing, right? Is just client engagement. They call, they email, um, and they have questions. So
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, what is some of that feedback that you get, and kind of how do you implement it? I know you spoke that one network wasn't exactly happy with what you reported, but you did report the facts. So what kind of words and topics do you hear coming back to you in that feedback, and how are you able to kind of take action upon that?
yeah, so usually when an event happens, our financial model is in one position, and then after the event, we adjust those figures, right? However big or small that event was. And a lot of clients want to know how the assumptions that we inputted there to get to that number at the end, right? They're like, they actually take screenshots from a year ago. They're like, hey, a year ago, this number was at 3.05 and now it's at 3.07. Like, what happened? Like, hello, the event that we just talked about. But yeah, so it's, just walking them through the difference between prior to the event and now, and kind of the assumptions that we have in place to get to those new figures, because they use our data in their big meetings, and so they're like, hey, I presented on your old data 2 weeks ago, and now I got to tell them that it's different. Like, give me the answers to explain why it's different. That's really what it is. It's they are so high on our information that they need to know when they get questioned by their bosses why it's different versus, well, Adam said so. So that's the answer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Alrighty, moving on to kind of the future of your job and the industry as a whole. This was something that you did touch on already, kind of the state of the art in your field. You say now as people are coming in, that's a little bit more on the end of Python analysis and models specifically. How do you see that changing? Is there anything on the horizon that kind of piques your interest? And if you could speak a little bit more to the current state of the art in your industry, and maybe the tools that you utilize day to day to conduct your analysis.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely see the value in those bigger software programs. Right now, I just use Excel heavily. And for me, I mean, that's what I was trained on in my previous job. And so far it's gotten me through. I haven't had to subscribe to any new trainings or anything like that. But I see the value in it. I actually have a friend who's a head of research at a small company here in San Diego, and he could not speak any less about Python. And he was like, the things you can do in Python, it will blow away your mind. Like, so I don't have the need for it now, but I'm sure if we get a new head of research here at some point, he's going to make all of us jump on the bandwagon or get out. I don't know. But yeah, I don't have too much experience with it, but I'm sure once that day comes, I'll have to do it. What was your other part of the question? Sorry.
That was pretty much it. Well, clearly the kind of the knowledge that you do have has served you well so far.
Yeah.
Moving on, how do you feel COVID has impacted your job? Has being at home and not necessarily in an office changed what you do day to day? And if you don't mind my asking, would you be excited to go back into an office, or are you kind of happy with the remoteness?
So I've been COVID ready since like 2015. My office was in Monterey. I was up there for a couple of years. When we found out we were having my son, my second child, they allowed me to work remotely from San Diego. So I've been a remote employee for several years. And then when COVID hit, my wife she was working right back here behind me. Like our chairs were literally back to back. So that lasted about a week, and I kicked her out, and now she's in the next room. Um, but other than that, I mean, COVID hadn't really changed my operation. Even when I was in the office, my boss, he was pretty hands off. Like I said, 3 months into my job, I was the resident expert in sports media. So didn't need too much hand holding at that point. He would literally come into the office at 2 o'clock in the afternoon after working the morning from home and close his door. And then I'd be out, around 4:30. So not too much interaction. Um, but everything, I mean, I think the rest of the company who's gotten used to working remotely. They're a lot better about communicating through email or Zoom or things like that. So, I mean, I think in the past, I always wondered, if I stayed in the office, would I have better opportunities to move up, get promoted, manage a team, things like that. And that's the pros and cons of the freedom of working remotely. But um, you know, I love the flexibility. I can go drop my kids off at school. I can go coach football after, and then come back to work. I have a nice little setup that the company's provided me here. So, um, yeah, I'm comfortable, and I think it's written in my contract that I could be a remote employee. They actually shut down the Monterey office right before COVID hit, so um, a lot of people are displaced. So
Absolutely.
so far, so good.
Have the restrictions kind of impacted how you relate with your clients at all? I know they're obviously scattered across the U.S. So did you do traveling before that, or was most of the stuff you did over email or through phone calls, etc.?
Prior to COVID, I'd travel maybe 3 or 4 times a year to different conferences, which was probably the best part of my job. Just meeting the people that are reading your research reports, meeting the people that you read about, in the news. And yeah, so that part's missing. But prior to that, or other than conferences, I kind of stay put. Um, so looking forward to getting back to, I guess, rubbing shoulders with the big wigs in the sports media industry. But if not, it's fine. There are other firms that kind of do the similar research, but not to the depth and breadth that we do, which is why, I have the luxury of waiting a couple days to really sit back and analyze the data, and put out a report that pushes the ball forward. I don't need to be first. And I think that's another, kind of case in point for people to understand is understand where your organization sits. Where what's the bread and butter of your organization? Um, where are you guys positioned, and what's the best path um, to kind of take advantage of that positioning? So, like I said, I'm always going to wait a couple days and really uh, do my due diligence and marinate on the data before I put it out, because I can do that. And the numbers that I put out, if you sit at a doctor's office and you read something on sports media, you're probably going to see a reference to Kagan or S&P Global, because our numbers are kind of the industry standard. Um, so understanding your organization, like doing a little market research on your own company and on your own role, will help you leaps and bounds in how you approach your work, and understanding where what that article is for your organization and for the larger kind of media segment.
Absolutely. Well, beginning to wrap up, one kind of big world question I've got for you. Do you have any words of advice for students who are kind of just entering the professional world? Doesn't have to specifically be in analytics, it could be, but just generally.
Yeah. If you aspire to be in sports, it's tough, right? A lot of people want to work in sports. You're probably not going to get it your first pass through, and even if you do, if you mess up, they're probably going to can you and get somebody else in. So I say, obviously, have your list of wishes, have your wish list of your top 5, but also make a B list, and that B list should include positions that will get you the skills and the experience that's going to position you to get back to the A list, right? Don't wait around for the perfect job. You're probably not going to get your perfect dream job on your first pass, your first experience out of school. Like I said, I took the sales route, but just make sure every job that you take is more than a paycheck. Make sure that it moves your resume forward, make sure it moves your experience forward, and that you're not wasting your time. The sales jobs that I did take on, it was super valuable to the things that I do today. Just being comfortable talking to clients, understanding the what's in it for me kind of sales. Like when you go into a sales meeting, you have to understand what's in it for them, and speak things that they value. And so when I write an article, I'm able to kind of touch on that experience and say, hey, this article, who am I talking to, and why should they read it? So make sure every job that you take is more than a paycheck, that it moves your resume forward. And then at the end of it, really understand the value and the skills that you took away from that. Another random job I had out of college was I was a special needs therapist. I was teaching kids with autism how to do basic tasks, and I use those skills today with coaching, with just the psychology of, what happens when you put this article in front of a client. What are they thinking about? Things like that, right? And so, yeah, more than a paycheck. Don't just take the money because you'll get burned out, and then you're going to start back from square one. So yeah, just have your eye on the prize. Keep that written on your bathroom mirror. But if you don't get there on the first pass, take the next step that'll get you in a better position to take that role.
I could not agree more. Final big picture question for you. This one's coming a little bit out of left field, but I would love to know what you are most excited for about the future. Doesn't have to just be in your job role. I would prefer it to not be, but in the world of life, what are you most excited for coming up?
My daughter, she just started her soccer career, and so sports is, my wife played soccer, I played football. We're a very competitive, sports-minded family. And so just to see her enjoy and fall in love with sports the way we did. And then my son is 4, and he'll hopefully take on some sports himself. And I don't know, just to relive that experience as a child through their eyes. And yeah, that's the reason why sports is so great, right? It's becoming super commercial, even at the collegiate level, where it's a business, and you're the better player, but he gets more clicks and views, so he's like, youth sports at its core is as pure as it gets. And so I get to experience that, and it reinvigorates me to, the way I cover sports media. It's the purity of it. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Absolutely. Well, that was a great answer. Adam, thank you so much for all the insight that you've given us today. I'm sure our students are going to love to hear from you. Any final thoughts or closing words?
No, just thank you for the opportunity. And I shared with Jackson, I'm always open to helping upcoming future sports analysts or anything like that. So feel free to reach out to him for my contact information. I'll do my best to reply and do whatever I can to help you guys. Just don't take my job.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Adam.
Your fancy Python and all that stuff. I'm just joking.
Alrighty. Well, thank you very much, and we'll hope to hear from you soon.
All right. Take care.